We do want to welcome everybody, especially our guests. So glad to have some of our MEE students with us today, Somerset High School students and others that are represented. I want to especially thank Ms. Crawford for her very diligent work in this process to bring this unique opportunity to our students and to others. We want to thank our Supreme Court justices, all that have worked along with them and all that have helped to make this, this opportunity a reality today. Students, I hope you realize that this is not a run-of-the-mill guest speaker type of a situation. This is a very special opportunity. Some of you, I think all of you guys have been somewhat apprised of the case that is being brought, and I heard some good lively discussion among some of the students around that, and that's what this is an opportunity for you guys to get to see kind of the civics lessons that you may learn in the classroom applied, and not only that, but you get to see the faces and the names of the people who are helping to shape those decisions in our state. So with that, I just again want to thank everybody, welcome each one, and at this time I'll turn it over to Miss Susan Clary.
Well then, it's my pleasure to introduce the justices of the Supreme Court of Kentucky that are here with you today. I'm the clerk of the court, court administrator, general counsel, so that just means one salary for 3 judges. And we are so pleased to have our Chief Justice, who's in the middle, John D. Minton Jr., and he's from Bowling Green. To his left, your right, is Justice Michelle Keller, who's from our northern part of the state. Our justices represent different regions of the state. And from the western region of the state is Justice David Buckingham, and I think our Chief Justice is going to lead off.
Well, we appreciate, Ms. Crawford, the work that you have done to try to get, we probably should have been in your class learning about this case that these cases we're going to be hearing tomorrow, and I know of some of you, or all of you, I don't know if it will be part of that group that will be participating in the oral argument of these 3 cases that come to us out of Fayette County. But we thought this would be a good chance for us to visit the schools. There are 7 justices. There are 3 of us here today. There are 3 over 4 over at the Christian school, and then Justice Lambert, who is the justice from your area, will be coming over here to join us later. So she's going between the 2 schools. So we split up so that we could have a chance to visit in the schools. So I want to introduce myself, John Minton. I am the justice elected from the 2nd Appellate District, which is 14 counties in Kentucky that includes my hometown of Bowling Green, where I live and where I practiced law for a period of time before I was elected circuit judge there, and then a time on the Court of Appeals. So I've been with the courts a while. But I'm from the 2nd Appellate District, and I'm going to let the others, my colleagues, introduce themselves, and then we'll tell you a little bit about the court. We want to give you time to ask any questions that you might have. So, Justice Keller.
Thank you, Chief. It's my honor and privilege to be here today. I was just talking with, I think, maybe the greeter or your school secretary out front about how beautiful the setting of this school is, and kind of reminds me of my high school in the small town that I grew up in. I represent the Northern District, which is the 6th Appellate District, and it's not exactly just the Northern District. It's Covington and Newport and those river cities that are just south of Cincinnati, but it's all the way down through the hills into eastern Kentucky and Bath County, and down the other side of the highway through Grant, Carroll, Owen, Henry, Trimble, Oldham, Shelby, and Spencer, so all the way to Louisville. So it's a very diverse district, and it's a privilege for me to sit on this court with my colleagues. And even though we're elected from districts, we have statewide jurisdiction. So in a way we do represent all Kentuckians, because each opinion that we render affects all the citizens of the Commonwealth. So I think that's an important thing to remember, and we do work collaboratively on our court in reaching all of the decisions. I've been a judge since I was elected in 2006 to the Court of Appeals. Before that, I was a trial lawyer, starting out as an assistant county attorney, which is a prosecutor position in my home county where I've lived all my life. I'm married to Jim Keller for the last 33 years, and we've raised 2 daughters, one of which is now practicing law, and one of which followed her my husband, her father, into the healthcare field. He's a physician, and she's doing public health. So it is my privilege to be here. I think the Chief was going to ask us to talk about maybe our path a little bit, but I'll let Justice Buckingham introduce himself, and we'll go into the next round.
I'm David Buckingham, and I'm from Murray. For those of you that don't know where Murray is, if you drive about 4.5 hours straight west from here across the southern part of the state, over the bridges, then you'll find Murray in the far western part of the state. We're about 45 miles from Paducah. I guess our recent claim to fame in Murray is Murray State University, and for those of you that follow college basketball, we had the #2 draft pick in the NBA this last year, Ja Morant. So that put us on the map even more prominently. I represent the 1st District. That's, I believe, 24 counties. It's further west than Chief Justice Minton. He's in Bowling Green, as he told you, but we're further than that. We're further west than Bowling Green and Owensboro. I was first elected as a district judge in 1982 when I was 30 years old, and I served for 5 years as a district judge. Following that, I served for 10 years as a circuit judge. There are 4 levels of court in Kentucky, and someone will tell you about those in a few minutes. But I served for 10 years then as circuit judge in Callaway and Marshall counties, 14 years on the Court of Appeals, the last 5 of which I was a senior judge assigned to the Court of Appeals with a limited caseload. And at that point I retired, or so I thought. I retired and went back to private law practice for 8 or 9 years before the governor appointed me to the Supreme Court in April of this year. And I'll be leaving the court in a couple of months, and there'll be an election to fill my seat. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm a long ways from home, but I think I can find my way back.
You just get on Kentucky 80 and go west.
Just keep going.
Keep going west. We're going to talk a little bit about, and I'm not sure, we really want to talk about what you want to talk about, but I guess we'll give you a little background about what we do and how we got to be there. Kentucky is one of a handful of states in the country that has what's called a unified court system. Back in the mid-70s, the voters of Kentucky decided to amend the Constitution, the state constitution, and really remodel the court system that had been in existence since the Commonwealth came into existence in what year? Commonwealth became a state in what year? 17 and, speak out. Ms. Clary?
I'm gonna get it wrong.
1792. 1792. So since 1792, the court system was essentially the same. There were changes over the years, but the watershed moment, the big moment for us as a court system, and our branch changed dramatically when the voters decided to amend the Constitution, adopt the judicial article in the mid-70s, and so we put all the courts that used to exist in the 120 counties became connected into one unified court system, and so we have 4 levels of court that exist across the state. And we think of this in terms of one court that sits in 120 counties. And that first level of court would be the district court. So here in Pulaski County you have a district court. You have the next level up would be the circuit court. And that's what we call our general jurisdiction trial court. That's where the trial takes place. Tomorrow when you hear, if you're part of the case tomorrow, you know this court, that case came to us for a decision because of a decision that was made, or decisions that were made in 3 cases by the judge in the Fayette Circuit Court, which is in Lexington. And he made a ruling in that case, and that case then comes up to us by transfer for us because it raises, as you all know, some pretty significant constitutional questions that we're going to be required to try to answer. So so the circuit court, though, really is the place where jury trials happen, where most of the work of the court happens. Now, a lot of work happens at the district court level, but they're what we consider to be smaller type cases. They're important to the people who are involved in those cases, but they're not as major as the cases in circuit court. Here in Pulaski County, you also have a division of circuit courts. It's called the family court. And back about in the late 90s, mid-90s, late 90s, the Constitution was amended one more time to allow us to add the family court, where the court could focus on issues involving families and children. Things that were traditionally part of the circuit court were split off so they could get specialized treatment by family court judges. So that's the circuit court level. Everybody in Kentucky, by our Constitution, has a right to an appeal. An appeal is a matter of right. Most of those appeals go right up to the Court of Appeals, which is our intermediate appellate court, 14 judges elected from the 7 districts. You have 2 elected from this appellate district, and 2 from each of the 7 districts. And then from there to the Supreme Court, where we'll talk a little more about the Supreme Court when I'm going to stop talking here that some of the others. Just to tell you briefly, I grew up in Bowling Green, went to grade school and high school there in a small high school, smaller than yours. It was a pretty small school. And I went to Western, graduated from Western. And from Western I went to the University of Kentucky College of Law. And from UK College of Law I came back home to Bowling Green, where I practiced law for about 15 years before I became a judge on the circuit court. And I served about 12 years, 13 years on the circuit court. Went to the Court of Appeals for a short period of time and then on to the Supreme Court. And I've been on the Supreme Court since 2006. In Kentucky, each state handles it differently, but your Chief Justice in Kentucky is elected by the members of the court. So I was elected to the court by the people of my district, and then the justices elect the chief to serve for 4-year terms. Our tradition allows the chief to succeed one term after another, and so this is my 3rd 4-year term as Chief Justice of the court. But that's something that we do. We hold an election every 4 years for that among ourselves. I was a history major, English major in college. For any of you who are thinking about going to law school, and I hope somebody in here is thinking about going to law school, because we need good minds and sharp people to be lawyers and judges in this state. The advice that I got was take everything that requires you to have to learn to organize your thoughts and put them down on paper. So anything that makes you write and express yourself in writing would be a great benefit to you if you were to choose law as a profession. There are a lot of other things. You can come from a lot of different backgrounds. I think Justice Keller will emphasize that as she tells you where she comes from. Traditionally, you know, it might have been the liberal arts, history, and so forth, but that's not always the case. We as lawyers have need for lots of experiences and lots of training in different areas. So that's me. I'll turn it over to Justice Keller.
Thank you, Chief. And before I talk a little bit about my path, I want to say publicly a thank you to our Chief for his service, because my colleagues know, and any justice knows who served on our court, it's a lot of work. It's a great honor and privilege, but it's a lot of work. Double that work for the Chief Justice, because the Chief Justice also is the Chief Administrator of our 3rd and co-equal branch of government. We try to help him as best we can. We're willing to take assignments here and there, and he always is willing to give us some. But ultimately, he's the one in charge of our branch of government. It's a lot. It is a lot, and so he's done a fantastic job, and it's really a calling, 7 days a week, 364 days a year. Well, I think he takes Christmas off, maybe. But as I said, we're the 3rd co-equal branch of government. That's important to remember. You all probably discussed that in some of your classes, but sometimes the judiciary is a little quieter. We're not, at least we try to stay out of headlines. We get pulled into them, but we're rendering what we think and do through our opinions. The lower courts are doing it through their judgments, and so sometimes people forget how important that 3rd branch can be until they're called upon, until they're needed. The interesting thing about our Commonwealth, many of you have probably visited the state capitol. I know many schools do in the 4th and 5th grade, because we get to host a lot of those young people. But You know, the great thing about our Capitol building is not only its beauty and its history, but the fact that all three branches are working simultaneously at the same time. So the first floor, you have your executive branch officers, including the governor and lieutenant governor. The second floor is occupied by the Supreme Court. We have a beautiful and historic courtroom. All the justices have chambers. The clerk has, our Madam Clerk has her office, and her staff works there daily to make sure that we're on the right track. Portraits of all former justices, or most of the former justices, and our state law library, which is a great resource. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to visit if you haven't. And then the third floor is divided between the House and the Senate, and their staff that helps to support them. So it's really worth a visit if you haven't been there. A little bit about my path, which is a little different than the chief's. I did not start out necessarily intending to go to law school. I think I always had it in the back of my mind, but when I was a freshman in college, my mother passed away suddenly, and I was the oldest of 5 children. Some were very young. So I halted my college education for a little while, went home to help. And during that time, decided that I needed to get through college as quickly as possible, get a career that I could be self-sufficient, independent in, and also you know, kind of meet my personal goals. And so I chose nursing. So I started as an RN and had a 4-year degree. My background is science. It's not history, and it's not poli-sci, and all the typical English and those kinds of classes. So I was a nurse at the VA Medical Center, and I learned a lot. I will say that while I was concerned that my nursing education would not prepare me well for law school, the life lessons I learned as a young nurse in the ICU, CCU, critical care area, taking care of very ill people and dying people, were lifelong lessons that helped me be a better lawyer and hopefully a better justice. I actually met my husband while I was practicing nursing. He knew I was always interested in law school, suggested that I take the LSAT, and so I did. That's the law school admissions test. Got a book, studied on my own, got admitted to our local law school, which is Chase College of Law. We have 3 law schools in Kentucky. We have the law school at the University of Kentucky, the law school at the University of Louisville, and Chase College of Law is at the Northern Kentucky University. And at that time, and they still do, Chase had a night program. You could take 4 years instead of 3 and work full-time, and that's what I did. I worked as a nurse, and I went to law school at night. It took me a year longer, but we had a lot of people in my class that were like me, going back from other professions. And so when I showed up that first day, I thought, oh, these are all going to be people who really know how to write proficiently, and maybe I'm not that person who know how to think in a way that a lawyer thinks. What I learned is that many professions can prepare you for law school, because to be an RN, you have to be organized, you have to be efficient, you have to be logical, you have to be a problem solver, and you have to write down all the important things that you do. I didn't realize that those skills that I was using every day were actually preparing me for law school and the practice of law, and I didn't even realize it until I finally got through my legal education and looked back. At the time that I was admitted to law school, I was just happy to be admitted. I applied to one law school, and that was it, and I got in and I went. And my goal was to get through to the next year and the next year and the next year and graduate, and then to pass the Kentucky bar exam. And then my goal was, hopefully I'll get a job. All those goals I saw all those goals, but what I'm trying to tell you, I guess, is I didn't have a long-term plan that was neatly set out that I could just tick off the marks on. I had to just do it a goal and a step at a time. And I think a lot of people have to do their education and their life that way. And even though I was slightly older when I got out of law school, I was 30, almost 30, not quite, when I graduated from law school. I think the maturity and the other professional experiences that I had made me a better lawyer, and actually made me very employable, because at that time there weren't many nurse/attorneys, and so the local law firms were like, oh my gosh, she can try cases about medical things, she can understand. So I never wanted for a job from the time I graduated till my present position at the court. So whatever your skill set is, even if you think it's a little bit non-traditional, you should never discount whatever your passion might be, because you can blend those things. And the other thing I will say before I turn it over to Justice Buckingham, is that, you know, as society progresses, we get more technologically and scientifically oriented every day. Just keeping up with what we need to keep up with as citizens is hard enough. So the courts have sometimes really struggled with scientific evidence and with how to process it and keep up with technology and science. And I will tell you that little did I know that my background would be so helpful in that area, because those scientific fields weren't foreign to me. I could read that material and understand it. And that's very helpful, because when you're, let's say you're a trial lawyers learn, they become experts in everything, whatever case they're trying at the time. If they're trying a construction case, they become an expert in the construction of that dwelling. If they're trying a medical malpractice case, they become an expert in that part of medicine that they're talking about. Products liability, even auto accidents and injuries. Lawyers have to become mini experts in whatever they're doing in order to be effective. And so whatever background you have that helps you synthesize all that information and be able to drill down and put it back out in a way that a jury can understand is really it's really a helpful skill set to have. So that being said, I'll turn this over to Justice Buckingham to talk about his path.
Let me ask this before you start.
Sure.
Ms. Crawford, we talked till the bell rings, and since you probably don't have a bell, you'll have to,
I will tell you.
you just give us the
We are
signal.
good. I will do this.
Okay.
We want to give some time for them to ask questions too, so kind of give
They've
us
been working on a few questions.
Good.
Be interested to hear what they've come up with.
All right, excuse me.
I'll be quick with my path. It's pretty conventional. Out of the 7 justices on the court, everybody had a different path to get to the Supreme Court. Mine was fairly traditional, and I'll be quick about this. I graduated from high school 50 years ago this year. I'm probably the oldest, or one of the oldest on the court. You know, everything was pretty good. A small town high school, went to the local university, Murray State University. Then I went on to law school, and that's where I began to encounter a few difficulties. I probably didn't apply myself like I should have. I was single, I wasn't married at that time. And to be quite frank, my grades were horrible. And I wondered at the end of the first year whether I had even passed or not. It got a little bit better in the second year, and a little bit better, it seemed to click with me in the third year. And I did graduate. Certainly wasn't near the top of my class. I might have been a lot closer to the bottom of my class. But the point I want to make about that is that whatever grades you make, that's not going to define you in your life. I don't know, I think a lot of you in here may be AP students, but whether you excel or don't excel after high school, the grades you've made, that's not going to define you. What's going to define you and your career and your success, in my opinion, would be 2 things. Number 1, how hard you work to improve yourself and how hard you apply yourself to whatever you're doing, whether it be further education or a job. And number 2, doing the right thing. And I tried to do those 2 things with my career after I got out of law school. Now, some of my success, I think, were because of those 2 reasons. But on the other hand, sometimes fate plays a hand, sometimes luck, or whatever you want to call it. Like I said, I thought I'd retired 7 or 8 years ago. When I went back into private practice, thought I was going to play a lot of golf, do that sort of thing. And, you know, I practiced a little bit. And then out of the blue, the justice that preceded me, Justice Cunningham, decided he was going to retire. And my name was forwarded with 2 others to the governor, and he chose me. Now, why? You know, I had a lot of experience. I'm sure that played a part. But, you know, I didn't go seeking the job. It came to me, and I'm very blessed to serve with the others on the Supreme Court. So the point is, wherever you are in your life today, as far as good grades, bad grades, undecided on what you want to do, don't worry about that. There's plenty of time. And where you are right now is not going to define who you are 25 or 35 years from now.
You know, Justice Keller mentioned her science background and how more and more we're encountering these sorts of issues. And for those of you who'll be listening in or participating in the audience tomorrow for our oral argument, you know that brain science is one of the things that's going to be discussed as a part of this case. So you're going to be ready for it, and certainly someone in Justice Keller's position who understands the terminology from the get-go will be miles ahead. So the work we do at the Supreme Court, ours is that we are the court of last resort. We are the High Court of Kentucky. And my job includes, of course, as Justice Keller mentioned, the administration being responsible for, as the Constitution of Kentucky says, the executive head of the Court of Justice. And so we have an administrative arm of the courts. Our director of the administrative office of the courts is from Somerset. So, and she claimed very proudly this is her home, and her mother still lives here. So anyway, she is the head of the administrative office, Laurie Dudgeon, and that's responsible for resourcing the courts around the state, all across the state. But my job tomorrow, and you'll see us functioning, will be as one of 7 who are charged with listening to and making decisions on important cases. And for the most part, the Supreme Court will be the final decision-making place for a lot of the law that applies in Kentucky. Obviously, the legislature has a function that they are the lawmakers, but the interpreters of the law and when the legislature passes a statute, sometimes we're confronted with having to apply that to life in cases that come before us. And so we have appellate jurisdiction in all cases, criminal cases, in which the penalty that could be imposed would be anything from 20 years in prison to life, to death. That's our appellate jurisdiction for criminal cases, and then in civil cases we take cases on what's called discretionary review. We decide whether or not to hear the case based upon whether there are unique issues that need to be resolved. And I don't want to get too far into those kinds of details, but our job is to decide cases as a court, and we do that. The 7 of us together. We talk about the cases together, and then we vote. If all of us agree, then we produce an opinion that is a unanimous opinion, but we don't always agree. But our obligation is we're what's called a collegial court. In that, we discuss these cases and we disagree, but we do so in a collegial way, respectful way, and that's how we resolve cases. The give and take of ideas. And so if I produce an opinion and one of my colleagues disagrees with it, then she or he can write a dissent and express, say, I disagree with the majority in this case. Or if I disagree with the reasoning, I'll be okay with the way it was decided ultimately, but I think the path they took to get there was not what I would agree with. Then I can concur, or I concur in the result. So all kinds of different ways we express ourselves, whether we're all in agreement or not. When 4 of us agree on what the outcome will be, that will be the decision in the case. So I'm going to stop talking now and see if we have some questions, and that will maybe help us know what else we're going to talk about. So please.
What they've been talking about, we've had a class on what to expect, and hopefully they can take about a week for some decision making about things that are on their mind that they would like to ask.
Okay.
As I had cautioned them about not to ask questions pertaining to the case that you're hearing tomorrow. We have discussed some of the relevancy of that.
You all understand that prohibition would be that we're prohibited from discussing, a case, except in the context of the case where everybody is present. That's kind of a fairness idea. Both sides have to be in the room. If we're going to talk about their case, they have a right to be here and hear what we say, and for us not to express opinions about about how a case ought to be decided except in the context of the case in the court with the people there. So it's kind of all about this basic and fundamental idea of fairness that people need to feel, not only see justice done, they need to be confident that justice is fair and even distributed. So what questions do we have? Yes, sir.
Are you guys nervous for the case tomorrow?
Sometimes. Yeah, that's a good question. I'll be asking.
Are we nervous about the case tomorrow?
Or just cases in general?
We're very interested in it because it's an important issue that affects people all across the United States, not just in the state of Kentucky. I wouldn't say we were nervous because once we hear the arguments in the case, we'll leave, we'll go back and talk about it, we'll research the law behind it, we'll sit in a conference of 7 and talk about it, we'll talk about it with the staff attorneys that work for us, and by the time we finally decide, each of us individually, on how we want to vote, we'll be well informed and we'll feel comfortable with that. So I wouldn't say we're nervous about it. It's the confidence that we feel we're going to give it our best effort as we do in all the cases.
I guess I would add to that, I think nervous might not describe it, but at least for me, and I think for most of us, we do feel the pressure. We do feel the weight of the decision. Some are weightier than others. Certainly in a case that has to do with the death penalty includes that. Sometimes the cases will pit the branches of government against each other, important legislation, things that affect all Kentuckians. Those decisions that we make, even though we make a lot of decisions that go unnoticed, some get a lot of public attention. And so while we're maybe not nervous, we're certainly keenly aware of what our job is and what the potential outcome of that is. And so I think we recognize the enormity of the task, if that helps at all.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. What else? Who else? Sir?
How do most cases reach the state Supreme Court?
Well, some come to us just automatically. If the case is tried in the circuit court, say downtown here at the circuit court, and Judge Tapp or Judge Burdett presides over a case, and it's a criminal case, and the jury returns a verdict, and the ultimate decision is to impose a sentence of imprisonment of 20 years or more. That case will have, that person who has been convicted will have a right to appeal as a matter of right under our Constitution when it comes to the Supreme Court. And that's true for all 120 counties, cases coming. So we have a steady stream of cases that come to us as a matter of right, if it's 20 years or more or the death penalty. Then we have other cases that that come to us in a little different route because the Court of Appeals, the Intermediate Appellate Court, may make a decision and the parties ask us to look at it. Would you all look at this case? Whoever feels like they lost in the court below will say, would you all look at this case? And they'll have to point out to us, why should we look at this case? Well, it involves a unique question of law that's not been addressed before, or it's been many, many years since it's been addressed, and things have changed in life, and you all need to take another look at it. Or it's a case that, because of the enormity of the issue, it involves, cases of statewide importance, and so then we decide that we'll hear those cases. So we have some cases we hear as a matter of right, and some cases we hear because we have decided as a group, 4 of us at least, have voted to say, this is an important case, we need to hear it. And then our decision will become not only the law of the case that binds the parties in that case, but also would become then precedent that would help instruct the next case. We'll create a rule of law that is applied then going forward until we change it. Now, if the issue happens to involve, tomorrow will be issues that raise not only state, maybe possibly state questions, but federal questions as well. If you are dissatisfied with the decision in our court and it involves federal issues, you have a right to seek review in the U.S. Supreme Court, and that happens from time to time. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Probably more than you wanted. Who else? Sir?
How many cases reach the Supreme Court each year?
It's about 800. The majority of them are the second type that the chief was talking about, where people are asking us to review. But our court, the federal system doesn't have a matter of right appeal, and our court is one of the few Supreme Courts in the United States that handles criminal cases, you know, as a matter of right. So they write a lot more opinions than some of the big states.
I might add to that, I heard last week that the Supreme Court of the United States only decides 70 cases a year.
Right. It can be under there.
Yeah. So, hand here, and then I've got some over here. Yeah.
Do justices have any responsibilities other than hearing and deciding cases?
We do. I think we mentioned a little bit about that in the beginning.
Did you all hear the question? He wants to know if we have responsibilities besides deciding cases.
Those of us, first I wanted to say about Justice Buckingham, because he's only here for a short period of time. As baseball season's winding up, I think of him as the ultimate pitch hitter. He has come in and picked up the mantle that Justice Cunningham dropped off, and really run with it and rolled up his sleeves and worked as hard as any of the other six of us, if not harder, to fill that gap, which is a difficult thing to do, to get up to speed as quickly as he has. So I want to make sure you all understand that. He talked about work ethic, and certainly it's embodied in his work. A lot of us wear other hats, usually by appointment or request of the Chief Justice. I am currently chair of our statewide Access to Justice Commission, which what we try to do is fill the gaps in the justice system for those Kentuckians that can't afford a lawyer or can't otherwise access the courts. We're looking at ways to help make their path to justice easier. There's a lot I could talk about. I could talk about the whole hour about that, but I won't. Also, we divide up the rulemaking obligations of the court. So I just finished doing juvenile rules. We just did a rule actually about competency evaluations for juveniles that are charged in juvenile court. Now I'm taking over the criminal rules, but we have a justice who does the civil rules and a justice that does the family rules, who just walked in the back door, your local justice, Justice Debbie Lambert, takes care of the family court rules. And in addition to those pieces that we do as far as rulemaking, the rulemaking function of the court, we all take on other things as well. We oversee the Kentucky Bar Association, the continuing education for lawyers. We oversee actually the budget for the Kentucky Bar Association. And we oversee just about anything that has to do with the administration of the bar exam, the admission of lawyers. So all these things about the practice of law are ultimately overseen by the court. And there's a justice that takes on all of those roles. And usually each one of us take on at least 2 extra duties in addition to writing the opinions. So to my left, I shouldn't have to introduce this justice because she's your justice. We spent some time talking about where we were all from and how we got where we are, but we're happy to be in Justice Lambert's district today, and happy that she has joined our court effective as the 1st of this year, and enjoy working with her. I think she and I are both the first women to occupy our seats on the court, which we don't talk about a lot, but I think for some people that's important to know, especially for maybe some of the young women in the audience, and I'm happy to call her a colleague. So since you just walked in, Justice Lambert, they've been asking some questions, and we've all talked about a little bit about who we are and what we do.
We have some hands over here, but before we do that, Justice Lambert, why don't you tell this group, maybe they all know you already, but in case some of them don't.
Well, some do, but maybe some don't. I'm Justice Debra Hembree Lambert, and I live down at Burnside. Everybody knows where that is, right? And I was a family court judge here some time ago, and one of the things I was in charge of was school attendance, and I apologize for my what appears to be an unexcused tardy, but it was really unexcused tardy, I hope. I hope you will excuse me. We started out this afternoon with some of our justices at Somerset Christian School, so that's why I'm a bit delayed getting here and a bit hot and sweaty too, but happy to be here with you and answer any questions.
We told you you were on the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we did.
good, so.
All right, let's get back to the hands we had. A couple, yes, sir.
Do you ever look back, like on cases you've been involved with and maybe regret decisions you made on that case?
I'd like to say never. That wouldn't be true. Yes, I do. And especially, I'll just say this, I started out as a circuit judge, a trial court judge, in 1992. And in particularly, I look back now, having lived this length of time since then, and I look back on some of the rulings I made, and one of the things I did on the circuit bench was I was a judge in one of the early versions of drug court. The role of judging was changing during this period of time, and judges in the past had not been involved in things like that, and I was part of a team. And my job on the team, I wore the black robe, so my job was to play the heavy, always, you know. I was the one that if you didn't do what you were told to do, then the judge here, you know, can put you in jail. And I think about that. I mean, I think about how I reacted sometimes. My expectations were probably unrealistic. I now have a little better understanding, maybe, of substance use disorders and what causes it and what brings. This is where the science has come a long way. So we have to always listen and learn. And listening and learning, if I had it to do over, I would dial some of that stuff back, and I would go back and I would address that case maybe entirely differently. You know, your life, a judge who has lived enough life to have some life's experiences is pretty important. It seems to me, and the older I get, the more important that seems to be to me, the more life I have lived. So, yes, I would do that, and I don't have to look that far back to think of cases that I, you know, would do it differently. As Justice Buckingham says, we give it all we know how to give when we make the decision, and then you just kind of have to let it live on after that. And sometimes you say, you know, if I'd have gone this way, it would have been a different outcome. And it might have been a better outcome. So, there are regrets, sure.
Can I add something to that, Chief?
Yeah.
I think we all would agree 100% with what the Chief has just said, but sometimes even at the time you're making a decision, it's not the decision you personally want to make. We are compelled, as we should be by the law, and applying the law to whatever is in front of us. And sometimes we have the ability to shape that law or tweak it a little bit, but we are mindful of our duty to apply the law and follow our precedent. And so sometimes, for instance, maybe we're called upon to reverse a criminal conviction because there were constitutional errors in the trial. We know deep down inside, as lawyers first and judges second and human beings third, our gut tells us that that person was probably guilty. But you know what? It wasn't a fair trial, and our job is to reverse that conviction. That's probably the hardest things that we're called upon to do, is to rule in a way that is completely opposite of how we personally feel in the case. It may be a case that has social policy implications. We've had several. We may be ruling in a way the law compels us that we don't personally agree with at all. I mean, maybe tomorrow is a perfect example. We all probably have some personal opinions about the death penalty and how it's applied, but we're guided by the law and how we think it should and ought to be interpreted in our state constitution and in our federal constitution. And so, you know, those are difficult. So while we look back and have some regrets because we're human beings and we're not perfect no matter how hard we try, even at the time we can have personal regrets even though we know we made the right decision under the law. And so I think that kind of juxtaposes that question a little bit.
Yes, sir. What makes you eligible to be appointed to the Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, it's an elected position generally, and I believe you have to have been licensed to practice law for at least 8 years, and beyond that, you have to be a resident of the district that you live in. But Kentucky differs from other states. There's a mix across the United States. Some states elect their judges, other states have their judges appointed by the governor. And in Kentucky, we are a state that elects its judges. But I do want to say that as a group, judges are not politicians. We are to an extent because we do have to face the voters at the end of each term. But generally, we don't set, politicians, legislators set policy. We don't set policy. We interpret the law as it comes to us. But whenever there is a vacancy in a position of a judge, then the governor does make an appointment, and that's how I got to the Supreme Court.
And it is a nonpartisan election, which is different than many elections. So we don't run as Republican, Democrat, or Independent. We just run as a judicial candidate, and that's in our state constitution and a very important aspect of our election of judges, I think, statewide.
Absolutely.
Question, yes ma'am.
What is a typical day like when you're not hearing cases or hearings?
Well, our schedule for the Supreme Court, we have historically, customarily, we follow a pattern. We all, as we say, as we've said many times, are elected from 7 separate districts. And so we all maintain offices in, like I have an office in Bowling Green. Justice Keller has an office in Covington, and yours is here in Somerset.
In the Court of Justice.
And you're in Murray. So we're all spread across the state, but once a month, generally, we all come to Frankfurt. We load up and come. We come with a box, a trunk full of boxes of cases, and our staffs come. And let me pause and say I have 2 lawyers that work with me standing back here, Katie and Alex. We all have law clerks who help us do our research. And we brought them along to say that we're not all of the same age. We have a lot of people, and maybe to give you an idea that you can, this is something you can do. I think it's a good job we do. Our pay is not the best, but boy, we try to provide the very best experience we can. And so we have a lot of very dedicated folks who work with us. So we spend a week in Frankfurt, and we deal with administrative matters, dealing with the court, when I talked about having to run the court as a business, as a court. Then we talk about what cases we're going to decide, and then we talk about our opinions. And during the time that I'm back in my office at Bowling Green, I'm working with my law clerks on research and writing opinions. And then the clerk, Susan, Ms. Clary, they've developed a computer process where we can post our opinions on a server, and I get to read the drafts from my colleagues, and we vote on them so that when we come together, I will have already read the drafts that we're to consider, and then we discuss it and we vote on it, and then we may decide that that's good, we're done with it, or we may decide, no, it needs more work, and we'll take it back and work on it some more. So we spend our time researching and writing. We spend our time reading each other's work. We spend our time hearing cases. Historically, we would do it about 3 days. We'd have oral argument during court week, 2 or 3 days. It's a lot of preparation involved in getting ready. If you all have been preparing for this case tomorrow, you see there's a lot of reading to do. So we spend a lot of time reading, researching, and then on top of that, as Justice Keller mentioned, we have other administrative things that we're required to do. So we spend a lot. It's a full-time job.
And the chief has a tremendous number of obligations from the administrative standpoint. He's responsible, and his office is responsible for coming up with the budget for the entire Court of Justice and presenting that to the General Assembly as well. But a typical day for me, I'm dressed more like you all, because you heard him mention the boxes. You wouldn't believe how many boxes we have to carry around. So it's a good thing, as Mama says, I'm a stout girl, because we have carts too, but there's lots of pulling and tugging of boxes in and out of the trunks of vehicles. And then a lot of times I will literally sit in the floor with a box and look through the pages of the record and look through the photos of or the exhibits that were there, and the other justices do that as well. But it is a lot of physical manipulation of the file and seeing what was filed, because a lot of the rules, the legal rules, are somewhat technical, and things have to be filed at particular times, and you have to look at the dates that they're filed and make sure everybody's following the structural rules in the case.
Yes.
Following up on Judge Lambert, is there how long are the files kept record? Are they archived indefinitely?
Well, as long as the case is pending before our court, they are kept in our offices and in the clerk's offices. We return the files to Susan Clary. I don't know if she's been introduced yet or not, but our clerk. And then if the case is sent back to the Court of Appeals or the trial court, then there is a physical movement of those files back to the county of origin.
And then ultimately, yes, the records, we have, records that go, because they have some historic significance. State Archives, for the very old records, the State Archives holds those records. If you've been to the, I think it's in Lincoln County, or Garrett, where they have the old, they used to have those big, they have old records they kept. But for the most part, once they reach a certain age, we send them to Frankfurt and they're housed in archives. But you could, if you needed to see a case from the 1940s, we
Yeah,
find.
ours are kept forever.
There's several that are online, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah.
you can research.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things we're doing, just kind of, we talk about how we're having to haul boxes. One of the things we're doing, it's important for you all to know this. We're converting the whole court system ultimately to electronic record. You can't imagine a world that's not. I mean, all of you have phones. We'll have an app for the Supreme Court. We will. But you'll be able to, that's the way the business of the world is going, and so that's where we're going to be.
I think they read our briefs, Chief, I think.
Yeah, they read our briefs online.
Yeah, briefs and.
They were briefs, and then did they get the amicus briefs too? Let me just say this. Okay, let me explain what I just brought up a term. There was about several hundred years that we spoke Latin in court, well, spoke French in court, believe it or not. And so a lot of our old terms are really antiquated, ancient language. One of those is that if you are interested in a case, you're not a party to the case before the Supreme Court, but you're interested in it because you really, so you can request, could I contribute an argument to this case? And if you are allowed to do that, you are called a friend of the court. But we don't use that term, well, we could, but we call you an amicus. Amicus. So you file an amicus brief. In this case, we had two amicus briefs, I think. Two or three amicus briefs. These are organizations that have an interest, one way or the other, in the important issues that are before us. And sometimes we'll have a whole stack of amicus briefs from people from all around the country. If someone from another state, an organization, a lot of these are national organizations, and tomorrow there will be national organizations that have filed amicus briefs in this case. Questions? Yes, sir.
Is it common to see the president, or have you seen him?
Is it what?
The president, have you met him?
Have I met the president?
Yeah.
I have not met the current president. I have met presidents in the past, but not this one.
Well, have they met him? Have you guys met him?
Not the current
No.
president, but I have met a former president.
I'll tell you a little story. I haven't met any of the presidents, but we were talking about career paths. My son went through college with a degree in occupational safety, which was a great degree. And as soon as he graduated, he could have started at a really good salary. As soon as he graduated from college, he said, I really don't want to do this. They kind of, well, I won't say what I said, but at any rate, he said, I want to be a golf teacher. So he moved to Miami and began to give golf lessons. And he met and spoke with the president several times down there. And now my son is back in Nashville giving golf lessons and doing stand-up comedy. So you know, even when you graduate from college, if you go to college and graduate, you may not know at that point what you want to do or where it's going to take you.
Just so the students to know, because we did have a preliminary lesson and we will do a follow-up lesson after you make a decision on this case. So do you have any projection about the length of when a decision might come down?
Well, not really. I will say this. The kind of the progression of the case will go this way. You know, we'll hear argument tomorrow, and right after we hear argument, we go back into the conference room and we discuss. And we go around the room, and now if the United States Supreme Court, they begin, the first one to speak will be the one who has the lowest seniority on the court. That is the one who came to the court the last. The youngest in terms of tenure under the U.S. Supreme Court model has to speak. And then the Chief Justice winds up. We don't do it that way. We just go around the table. We have a kind of an order that we take. And so each one of us will say, okay, here's what I think, how I believe this case ought to be decided. And after we have that conversation, we'll have an idea as to how the direction it's going to go. And so one of us then will be assigned, the Chief Justice makes the assignment of the one among us who will do the first draft of the opinion. Sometimes it's really clear and easy, and it won't take, you know, within a month, when we come back the next time, we may have a draft ready. Or it may be a more complicated case, and the person will do the best they can. We go back to court. We've got lots of other cases, but this one then would, you know, be decided. So the draft would come out, and then we would come back together, and if we don't all agree, or we have tweaks to make, so it just takes time. And so I can't say how long it'll take. We'll just get it done as soon as we can.
That's what I stressed with the students. That
I realize y'all are on
that
academic
tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I said, Miss Clary, we're on speed dial, I think, with her right now. So I told them we will convene another session as a group to discuss when the decision is.
Once the case
made.
comes out and we have announced our decision on rendition day, we call it. We release all of our cases for the month on one day, rendition day. Then the parties have a right to ask for us to reconsider. And that's pretty common for us to, you know, they have a reason. Essentially the reason would be, I don't like what you did. But they may have you know, you overlooked something, court, and we need you to look at it again. And so then that gets assigned to a justice to decide before it becomes final. So it goes through a process. But you all are on an academic calendar, so we understand that we're up against semester deadlines and so forth. But we'll keep that in mind.
Seniors, I'll email them a decision.
We'll keep your schedule in mind. Thank you.
Typically, we've really turned them over very quickly for a state Supreme Court. So while, you know, this is an important case and we need to get it right, I think you all will know the outcome. I feel confident.
Before you graduate.
Before you graduate.
Did I have anyone with a question before we wrap up?
Yes,
I
sir.
have more so a general personal question. Who's been the most influential person in your professional careers?
Great question. Most influential person in your professional career. Who wants to go first?
I would say that when I was in high school, I had a debate coach. I was on the debate team, speech and debate. I don't know what to call it now, but he convinced me to join the debate team, and I learned how to stand in front of people and talk without being nervous. Although I was a little nervous here today, but not too much. But a couple of the teachers that I had in high school.
Yeah, I would say kind of maybe the same thing. Not a debate coach, but I can think, it just comes to mind immediately, some teachers I had in high school, really. I would also have to say, for me, my father, who was not in the law, but who was had a significant influence on all of us, of course. But he did, and then were teachers. I think back on teachers that really had who really emphasized the need to just do the whatever it is you do the best you can at what you do.
I mean, I think there's many people who've influenced my career path. On a professional basis, I'd say now retired Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first female appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. That was happening at a time that many of us were in law school or thinking about law school, and so as women, that was a watershed moment in the United States in legal history. And I've had the opportunity to meet her because of my role as a justice, and it was a phenomenal experience. On a personal level, I'd say, there's many influences. My husband really is the one who so encouraged me to go back to law school and get another degree, and encouraged me to do that and follow that other dream. So I would say, and knowing how, we've talked about how we all run for office and all the things that are, how we all come to Frankfurt for a week or so every month or 6 weeks. That's a personal sacrifice that not only we give, but our families give. And so I think for me, I would say the support of my husband and my family.
For me, it was my elementary school principal. And I guess I was prone to argument even then. And I'm old enough that I grew up in a day of paddlings, believe it or not. And bless his heart, he got so put out with paddling me. I was not a mean child, but I was a mischievous child. I would do things like water balloons and things I shouldn't even talk about today. But when he gave me my diploma, I remember him saying, well, I guess you're going to argue with me about this too, aren't you? So he encouraged me to put my argumentativeness to good work, and I guess he was my best influence or my strongest influence. My parents, my father grew up very modestly, and his father was a coal miner, and he was only able to complete the 3rd grade, and my mother was only able to complete the 7th grade. So I didn't know anybody who had an education except the teachers around me, and they were wonderful influences. So I hope that encourages all the teachers here.
I think from what you said to us, it gives everyone hope in this building, no matter what just where we're at in life right now.
Exactly.
We have, you never know what direction the path will take you. You never give up and realize your dreams, that's for sure. I want to thank you all for coming today. This has been such a wonderful learning opportunity for us, so let's please give them a round of applause.